One thing that deserves a bit of clarification is what we actually mean by wet season fire. So in front of you at the moment on the screen there's a seasonal calendar. If you're of non-Aboriginal background in Northern Australia, then people often talk about two seasons, a dry season and a wet season. If you have Aboriginal background, then perhaps you recognise half a dozen seasons. It can vary a bit from one group to another. And I guess focusing in on fire, then there's a lot of discussion about fire in the early dry season and fire in the late dry season. But what we'd like to focus on with this discussion of wet season fire is actually fire in the monsoon season. So basically from about the middle of November through to, say, middle of February.
Look, it's a complete understatement to say that fire is important in the top end. I mean, I was reading, it was actually a rather old paper the other day, and it started off with a statement of that fire is integral to the landscapes of the top end, and that's absolutely true. I mean, if you go to the NAFI website, that's as good a representation as, in fact, it's an excellent representation of what happens with fire in the NT, in the top end particularly. Then you just see, you know, the extent of burning on an annual basis, the extent of late season burning, all those maps about when country was last burned. And so it's just absolutely pervasive influence on the top end. And we're in this really special landscape, but these savanna landscapes are a mix of grasses and trees. And to me, one of the really important aspects of that balance between grasses and trees is fire. I mean, that really, it's fire that determines the balance. Okay, so what Andy's just very kindly brought up there is actually one of a NAFI image of last burnt. And this particular image just really struck a chord with me, because basically those browns and reds. So this was from 2010 to 2019, so that intervening period. When was the last that the countryside was burnt? And those darker sort of reddy browns, whatever, represent the more recent fires. So when you just look at that image of the top end, then that just, as I say, pervasive about how important fire is. And we've got this amazing, across Northern Australia, we've got this amazing extent of savanna landscapes, which are this balancing act between grasses and woody vegetation. And fire is really what drives that. But what to me is so important, rather than just fire per se, is actually fire regime. And clearly, everybody be aware, we've got this dominance of dry season fire in the way that people manage landscapes at the moment. Greg's just recently produced this book, Flame of Convenience, where he puts forward some ideas about the potential role of wet season burning. And I guess one of the other big things that we've got going on is that over recent decades, we've just seen a collapse of small animal numbers, particularly small mammals in the top end. And sort of a subheading on Greg's book is, where has all our wildlife gone? I guess we just start asking questions about what's actually going on in this landscape. You know, we often hear that the top end savannas described as being the largest area of relatively unmodified savanna in the globe, and that's true, and they're really, really important. But it doesn't mean we've got no changes. So jumping back to that fire regime, then this whole question of, you know, wet season versus dry season is just part of the regime. There's a whole question of frequency of fire, there's intensity of fire, and you can get high intensity fires pretty much at any time of the year, certainly from right through the dry season, depending upon conditions of the day. And so I would suggest that there's no simple sort of right or wrong, that wet season burning is all wonderful and dry season burning is or isn't wonderful for the landscape. I think what we're going to see in different parts of the landscape is that different fire regimes at different times will get varying or have varying effects. And so here's a really good chance for us to actually exchange some ideas about fire and perhaps at the end of the day, actually broaden our toolbox a bit about how we apply fire in the landscape.